things like Confucius and some of those Eastern philosophers and stuff like that. There's so much that is passed down into their and then so much of the history we have is because we've done something fantastic enough that we. All right, welcome to another episode of the Joe and Doug Show. We are here with bougie coffee.
Bougie.
It's like espresso shot.
It is
delicious.
The good stuff.
I even have to sip it like that,
We
like
do.
to make that noise.
Pinky up.
Pinky up. Yeah, I didn't do pinky up there. We'll have to practice. No, but in all seriousness, we have an exciting show today. Really looking forward to chatting about a topic on culture. We were having a discussion this morning and in our staff meeting, and Pastor Mike brought up the New England Patriots culture. And as much as I despise the New England Patriots because they have won a ton of Super Bowls and but they have a culture that works, and they have some banners that or posters or whatever on the way in to the locker room, on the way out of the locker room, and they just a couple of like catchphrases that is their culture. And I think every team has stuff like that. I'm sure Youngstown Studio and Youngstown Computers and the businesses all have, hey, these are our core values, our culture that we're trying to set. And one thing that I've learned as a leader that I know you know as a leader is culture eats vision for breakfast.
Yes, for sure.
You can have all the vision you want, but if you don't have the culture to sustain it, forget it.
Yep.
So I want to talk a little bit about building culture under kind of this umbrella. We have realistically who we are, and then we have who we'd like to be. And a lot of times the conflict in the culture is the space in between that.
Yes.
People get frustrated. They struggle because we have a culture that is established, and then we have the culture that we're working towards.
Right.
And a lot of times they're not the same thing.
No.
So how do we be one thing while trying to be another? How do we help people on our teams, in our lives? Every family has a culture. Every church has a culture. Whether it's intentional or unintentional, you have a culture. And a lot of times that dictates whether or not your vision is successful, your life is successful, your family is successful, etc. So talk a little about culture building for you at the various companies and stuff that you're involved with, and maybe even at home, and we can get into a couple things in the culture.
All right. So first you have to understand the sort of the mechanics of the gravity that is culture, because you have to know like what naturally moves things in order to find pushback against it. Because if you let things happen the way they are, you will become as mediocre as everybody else. Right. And so once you know that, it's basically a push game, right, against, and then if you relax, it pushes back towards you and goes back to mediocrity. So as long as everybody understands what you're going to be being pushed to, like the middle set, are you going to push to be normal where you have inefficiencies? Are you going to lie? Or are you going to take advantage of people? What normal human beings do to one another is what you will become. And as soon as you understand that, you know what you're pushing against. And I don't necessarily think that I vilify who people are, but it's just part of who we are. I mean, we create that even if it's unintentional.
Yeah. So in building a culture, whether you're building a culture for yourself, right? That's probably the first place we build culture.
Yep.
Individually, we choose who we're going to be, who we're going to listen to, who we're going to be a part of. And then we pass some of that culture on to our companies, to the people that are around us. How do you pick what's a healthy culture and what's not a healthy culture? How does Joe decide? I know you do a lot of things very intentionally, and you experiment with things in your life personally, and I'm sure you do that in your companies as well. How do you decide? Did you sit around and list 13 things out on a dartboard and throw some darts and go, that's who we're going to be? How did you pick the culture you wanted for Youngstown Studio, for Joe, for your house, etc.?
I mean, it was a method of making tons of mistakes over a period of time, and we would bounce off things. We'd have good theory about what a good culture would be, and then we could be completely wrong. We'd have to say oopsies, and you'd have to go back to the drawing board. Like in one of the earliest things, I wanted to have sort of like the simplest rule set that I possibly can, easy to remember. You didn't have to create complications on top of it. So I was like we don't lie, we don't cheat, we don't steal. Really easy. You behave that way, and the rest will take care of it itself. And then with within that, there was still some things that I wasn't happy with. There's still some toxicity. So I was like, let's create a competitive environment, and the competition will keep people from straying and whatever. That was probably one of the wrongest things that I did, because competition did not draw out the best qualities of people. It drew out some of the worst ones. So literally all the mistakes that we made meant we took some of our strategies and we had to get off of them super quick. And the ones that ended up working, we ended up adding and magnifying.
Okay. I know for me, there are times where I need to drive a certain portion of culture across that I may not fully embody yet, but you know that that's where you're headed. And as a leader, you're going to reproduce who you are, not what you want. So how do you make a shift in your company or in your life or in your family when you're not there yet? What are the things you do to build culture? What are the things you put in place?
One of the first public things that I did was I did a little symposium on becoming a millionaire. And I was not a millionaire. And I had one dude, his name was Joe. I still remember him in my head. He asked me, "Are you a millionaire?" Right? And I was like, shit. No, I'm not. I'm not a millionaire.
Not me.
and I felt the blood drained from my head.
I was with you.
Yeah, the blood drained from my face, because I was like, no, you're absolutely right. What gall do I have to be talking about becoming a millionaire in the moment? I was like, you know what? I know the philosophies that I have right now bring me there, so I shouldn't be ashamed to know where I'm heading, even if I'm not there yet. It was a confidence thing, though, too.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting, because most people want to be the expert and have the experience and then talk about it. And then if you don't have that stuff, you haven't earned the right to speak about it. And what you're saying is yes and no. Yes, there's credibility that comes from already having done stuff. But I think the big secret for everybody is most everybody's making this up.
Yes.
That's the big secret that's out there.
Right.
Like the person that you look at and go, oh man, they're an expert. They were winging it for a long time to become the expert. They were figuring stuff out on their own. They were trying and experimenting and failing. And when we look at an expert, they're not necessarily any better than us. They were just willing to try the 300th time.
Right. Well, even when we're talking to addicts, I'm thinking to myself, like, what right do I have to be in front of you? I haven't had any of these struggles. And I'm like, no, I'm exactly what should be taught, because I could picture it in my head. My logic is good. I stayed away from it. So I've got some stories to tell about how I didn't go down a path that,
Yeah, and that's why when we do that on Wednesdays, I have an opportunity to, and I almost always open with when there's new guys, like, I just need you to understand this has not been a part of my journey. I don't want to be a poser up here. I don't want you guys sitting here thinking like I came out of drug addiction. That's not been a part of my journey, but I do have some tools and I have some stuff that can help you.
All right. So if you're on the receiving end of something that you're pitching, like you're in the audience, me teaching a millionaires, can you give me credibility on something that I'm not there if you know that going into it?
If I know you're not a millionaire, but you're doing a seminar talking about being a millionaire,
would you reject it?
I don't know if I'd reject it, but that's because I really, and this is going to sound totally contrary, but I really pride myself being teachable, and I want to position myself that I can learn anything from anybody, even somebody who's not a millionaire telling me how to be a millionaire. So there may be stuff in there to learn, but I'm probably going to check out some other resources and compare notes. I'm not going to take it at face value where Dave Ramsey tells you how to be a millionaire, like, you know that those practices are tried and true, and they have those, the folks that do the debt-free screams and I'm a millionaire, and he has those people on his radio show, and he can probably point to countless number. And when you have that type of track record, it's easier to take the evidence that's presented, even though everything you may say may be 100% true in that. There's something about scars that just help us. It makes things more believable. Yeah,
because you can name anything, like marriage advice. Okay, the first question I'm going to ask for you is, "Hey, your advice. How's your marriage, dude?" "Oh, I'm 5 times divorced." I think I'm going to pass this symposium.
I had a lot of fun though. And as pastor, I get a lot of couples. I've counseled couples that have been married for 35 years, 40 years. My wife and I'll be married 12. When you're in that spot, it's not that I don't know what works in marriage. It's not that I can't, but sometimes they're looking for a credibility that I don't have. They're looking for scars that I don't have. They're looking for fights that I haven't had to fight yet. And so I try and utilize, I don't want to I don't want to coach from a deficit. So I try and utilize people that already have the credibility. And so I'm like, oh, here's a couple that's been married 45 years. And yes, they were separated for a little bit and they know what you're going through and they've had the fight and they survived it. And they're going to be able to connect with you on a level that I can't. I can give you the principles and I can tell you what will work and what's worked in my 12-year marriage, but you can write me off if you want because, well, we've been married 35 years. What do you know? And unless the person is very humble and very teachable, having the credibility to come alongside in a marriage sense or really anything, but we live in a culture right now. Oh, we're going to go somewhere different. Here it is. I feel it. We live in a culture right now where we have a lot of 25-year-old business coaches and life coaches.
Yes.
And I just want to be like, shut up, dude. Like, go do something first.
Right.
Like you just get out of college. You don't know anything about developing a business or even 36, right? I've been in ministry for 17, 18 years. I've been a lead pastor for 7 years. And I have recently a couple of pastors, lead pastors that are older than me that are taking their first church and they're coming to me for advice and I still don't feel qualified to give it. Cause I'm like, you know what? I haven't figured this all out yet, but I'm recognizing in the midst of that, you know what? I do have certain experiences and I do have value here. I do have some scars and I can share some stories. But the gall, as you put it, the pride of some folks, they're going to come out and I'll charge your business, $5,000 to come to a leadership seminar. You've never led anything,
right?
You couldn't lead yourself out of a wet paper bag. You just took a class and got a certificate. And I think there's something to be said about the grit that comes from actually doing the job, which you are then going to coach somebody else at. I mean, the whole idea of coaching is like, I should have something to tell you, not just what the book says and what this says. So,
well, we watched this last season though. You had a whole generation that were, we saw that there were a bunch of people who weren't doing well because they lacked confidence. Mm-hmm. So we decided to start teaching confidence over competency. Yep. So you got a bunch of people who have all this, confidence, but the rest of us are sitting back saying, I feel for you, man. Cause you're on weak stilts here. Right. Yeah. But when we see it, we know that those people are going to need to come down really slowly and kind of help them come off of that.
Yeah, and it's important to not the goal of my life, and I would say for most people, my goal is never to be the expert. If I'm the smartest person in the room, I haven't positioned myself well. I want to be about in the middle of the pack in the room. I want to have something to offer somebody in the room, but I also want other people there, because if I'm the smartest person in the room, I don't need to be in the room. Like I always want to glean in that.
You can't learn from anybody.
Exactly.
You're stuck.
Exactly. And
but you and I both, we get to that point where we've made enough progress.
This is really good, by the way. Yes.
We need to stretch ourselves in a direction and push ourselves. So we don't like to get comfortable because we're at our worst when we're comfortable. Yeah. That is us.
Yeah. My natural state, if I get comfortable, my wife and I were just having this conversation. So the church is at a really interesting spot, and I'm feeling the acceleration of some things, and I'm feeling some growth, and we have a lot of emerging leaders, and I don't necessarily have spots for them all, and I'm trying to figure out how to scale what we're doing, and it's going to stretch me tremendously as a leader. And I'm recognizing, after a couple of conversations with leaders that are ahead of me that have gone through some of this, that yes, this is going to be painful, but if I'm willing to submit myself to the process and work through some things, I'll come out the other side a better leader, and the church will scale.
So let me share this with you, because we were talking about culture, and when you have sort of operations that grow very quickly, like one of my first companies, we were basically a 50% quarter over quarter growth company, and which means that it's impossible to hire enough people fast enough and to really adopt that growth fast enough to be able to keep up. And it is far greater and more threatening to grow faster than you can handle than not to grow faster 100% of the time. Yeah. So, when you're as an advisor, this is a more thoughtful lesson than my church can't grow, or, I can't put people in the seats and that kind of thing.
Well, and it's a really awkward position, not to talk about me and what I do, but I've gone out now with several pastors in the area locally and around the country, and COVID has killed a lot of churches.
Yep.
Jermel, who was just in from New Jersey, was saying the Assemblies of God in New Jersey has 60 churches, 2 of which have closed their doors permanently forever, and 58, the way he put it, they're flipping through the yellow pages looking for a casket, and they're not doing well. And even the churches that are meeting are at 30%, 40% of pre-COVID stuff. And I've sat with several pastors in the area, and they're like, well, we might be at 30%, we're lucky if we get 40 people, on a Sunday, and Bridge of Hope has just been this anomaly. God has just been drawing people, and he's used some really great people in our church. Jed Nally and everything they're doing with recovery is just powerful. Some of these other connector pieces are just pulling people into this space to where for us, I was sitting looking at the numbers recently. We're probably 110%, 120% of what we were before COVID. So we actually grew through the pandemic, which for me makes for really awkward cups of coffee, because they're like, how's church? I'm like, it's amazing. And then they start in, I'm like, oh, like the first 2 I did that, I came out the gate, and me, I'm super positive and energetic, and I'm like, this is happening, that's happening, this is amazing. And they're like, oh yeah, me too. And I'm like, oh crap, because I don't want to brag. I don't want to be that guy, but I was expecting reciprocal energy, and no, that has not been the case. And the more I'm doing that, the more I'm realizing that God's hand's just on this, and really blessing that. And I don't ever want to take credit for something, because I say this from the platform all the time. Like, this isn't about one person. God says, unless His Spirit draws people, they don't come. Now, we positioned ourselves so that they'll come. We make it, I want to say that we make it as easy as possible for them to come, and that when they come, they get to experience something they don't get anywhere else.
Yeah, and open leadership like you have, no matter if it's in spiritual or if it's in business, opportunities come to you that don't come to other people because of your mindset. So that's something like it's not exclusive to a church. So if you were to teach this is something that on the other side, like if you got in your head that COVID's going to kill your church, and then you positioned yourself like COVID's going to kill your church, you already inscribed it, right?
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And what's been fascinating is, so I text this out. I don't know if you saw it, but we're trying to put together a finance and business team at the church, because I believe with all my heart that we're $1 million church, and we can do $1 million worth of good in this valley, and we can change people's lives, and we can do that.
The floor of $1 million.
Yes, but we got to get there first. That's my first spot, and so and I had a dream this week, and you and I talk about this, and I'm just in this spot where I'm visualizing things and I'm seeing things, and then I say them out loud, and then they happen. We want to do these starter packs to help put a Bible in everybody's hand that's coming to the Lord, some notebooks, some resource, and kind of just a starter kit, because some of these folks are coming in, they've never been to church before, they don't know, up from down spirituality wise, and they're just coming in saying, I'm going to give God a chance. Can't be, much worse than what I got. And so we're going to take a swing, and they're getting saved, they're getting baptized. And then the question is, then what? And we want to be able to put some of these resources in their hand. And I think that, realistically, it's a big endeavor. And so I threw it out to the church. I said, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. And I'd been texting with Jed Nally and a few others, like, hey, what should be in there? What should we have? What should we do? And, they were, everybody contributed real well. And I threw it up there, and I was like, realistically, this could cost like $35 a pack if we get a good Bible and a couple of those things. And within 15 minutes, someone was like, Pastor, I'll buy the first 100. And then I think we have about $4,000 that's come in for it. But it literally, that conversation, I had 2 conversations. I could see what we needed to do. And within 15 minutes of opening my mouth, there it was.
Yeah. The master manifester, my friend.
Well, I don't know about all that, but I'm learning. I had this dream that someone gave the church $50,000, and then literally I was looking at our financial deck sheet last week, and we don't have $50,000, but like when I picked it up, it was so palatable. It was like it was in there, like I could feel it. And so I just sent out to the team because I want to grow our, it's not just my faith. I want to grow the team's faith. I want to help the leaders and the board understand that, like, when we ask God for something and we attach to it and we visualize it and we talk about it, it's going to happen. And so I put it out to everybody today, and a few people were super amped and, text back right away. And then, I text the board and I shared with the staff a little bit. And it's not because, some people may hear this and be like, oh, a pastor needs $50,000. I don't need $50,000. I'm a firm believer that God will give me everything that I need. But when you have a dream like that and you have that and you start visualizing like that, I know it's around the corner. It'll be here, and it'll infuse our church with the vision to carry out the culture and shift things in the valley so that we can do the things that we're called to do. I didn't know this whole thing was going to be about the church, but it's what's rattling around.
Well, no, it's good, because a lot of times we talk about like getting to a goal, but then people get to that goal and they don't know what's on the other side of that goal, when it has to be sort of like a train of goals where you become a goal machine. Yeah. One dude that guy that I do business with, we're doing some training for running, and he said, what the worst day is the day after your marathon. And he said, because you spend months of getting up and thinking nothing about your goal and training nothing about your goal, and it becomes all, your obsession. And then the day that it's done, you're like, what do I do tomorrow? Yeah. Right. So you kind of know when you're putting the dam on the last goal and moving on to the next one, it's got to be a perpetual thing.
Yeah. The interesting thing about marathons, it came from the city, and the guy ran from the city of Marathon to the Greek capital to give the king news. And upon his arrival to the king, he gives the king the news, and then he falls over dead. And now, to commemorate his memory, we run that distance. I'm just saying, it's a little twisted.
I gotta rethink my goals.
We should be doing like a 5K fun run, not like a
right.
No, but you're absolutely right. When we have goals like that, whether they're tangible things like, all right, we're going to see a $50,000 infuse of cash, and here's the thing that I know, and I've learned about money from talking with you and just seeing as we've done stuff. Like, there's somebody sitting out there, whether they're watching our show or they're going to hear me say it, that's like, I have $50,000 and I think what the church is doing is awesome.
Yep.
And they're going to write that check.
Exactly.
And they're going to walk in, and it's going to fulfill something they're supposed to do. Like, I'm giving them an avenue to fulfill what God wants them to do.
Yep. And they were just waiting for a message, and you gave it through your mouth.
It's not selfish. It's not any of those things. And I know a lot of us get uncomfortable around money, especially preachers, because so many have abused that. But at the end of the day, like, when we're doing righteous things, it's easy for me to stand up and feel really good about asking people for funds, because you've went out and you've worked really hard for that, and now you're going to sow it into something that's going to help a ton more people.
Yeah, and it passes through us. So like, we don't hold on to this. We do such good work with it, so that when it comes through, you're a conduit to having it go exactly where it should go.
Yeah, I tell our church all the time, we're designed to be a funnel, not a cup.
Yep, that's it.
If you're a container, you can only hold stuff for so long, and then it starts to decay and stink and grow stuff. But when you're a funnel, it just flows through you.
That's absolutely right.
It's good. So let's circle back on some of the culture stuff. Yeah. So if you want to shift a culture of finance, let's go there, because I will say that the Valley has a reputation, whether or not it's true or not, has a reputation for being a little tight on their funds, a little negative towards a little risk averse on certain things. And if you want to create a culture in your company of generosity, or in your life of generosity, and being able to give and release, and I've talked a bunch about that in other shows, but creating a culture for that, and saying, I know that when I came into the church, I've brought us along on the faith journey and on the finance journey. And so helping my team see money the way that I see it has been challenging, and I've had to reinforce things because people have their own set that they come with from home. I had my own stuff to work through too. I'm not by any means a guru on this, but as I've grown in this, I'm recognizing there's certain ways to handle that. And it's the same thing, we could talk about vision, faith, manifesting, any of that stuff, to help another person come along in that, to teach and to transfer information, so that that's the culture of the church. It's one of the things that I love, or the business or the life. It's one of the things that I love, getting compliments from people that have no church background, and they come to our church and they'll say things like, I've never felt so loved in my life. And I'm like, yes, or man, the people here are ridiculously friendly. Yes. Like those things. And it's not that we don't have bumps in the road. And it's not that we don't have, people that come in baptized in lemon juice some weeks and they're just miserable. But by and large, our culture as a whole is known for X or Y or Z. How do you accept that with grace and go, all right, we've done something really, really good, and not get complacent?
So, well, let me go this direction, and I'll see if I can weave back and answer that question. So I'm going to use gambling as a
Church
sort of an analogy.
I like it.
So for a long time, when I was in my gambling phase, I was under the impression that if you ever go up to the roulette wheel and you've never been up to the roulette wheel. So there's this wheel.
Well, I will say, on family vacations, we will do a casino night for popcorn or chips or whatever, and we have a little roulette wheel. None of us know how to play.
Okay.
We just kind of roll the ball and everybody picks a number. It's not actual roulette, but I've seen the ball roll.
Okay. So basically the philosophy is that there's red spaces and there's black spaces.
Right.
And they have this little board that's outside of it that tells you what the last 20 rolls would be. And then if you see the board and it's rolled 12 blacks in a row, you're like,
red.
It's going to be red, right? But history does not dictate. History does not remove some of the spaces to give it a chance of being more red this time than it was before. But I was always under the impression that red is due if black came out too many times.
Yeah.
Mathematically, that is not the case. So in our area, if things go too good for a little while, shoot a drop it's mathematically a certainty when it's not a certainty. So the grace that you have to have is that if you have people that play sort of a defensive game and they experience too many things where something bad has happened, their expectation is what brings it into their world. So really you have to talk them out of the mathematics behind, the bad stuff isn't due you. It's not like you were subscribed to and it's just a matter of time before it shows up.
That's so good.
You like it?
Yeah, that'll preach. I'll steal that.
Do it.
I like that. One of the phrases that I say, and I'm sure other preachers have said, I probably heard it somewhere and stole it, is that the atmosphere of expectation is the atmosphere of expectation is the breeding ground for miracles. And the whole idea is if I bring my expectation to this and I can see the miracle take place in front of me, I'm able to have it. My wife had her, on a very physical level, had her thyroid healed a couple of years ago. So she went to a service. We have all the blood work and all that stuff. And you and I have to do a show on that sometime because I know that totally intrigues you.
Oh, for sure.
But there was no medical reason. They were talking about thyroid medication, everything else. She had Hashimoto's thyroiditis. It was consistently inconsistent. She would have hypo and then hyper, her hair would fall out. She couldn't sleep, all that stuff. And she went to the service, got prayed for, didn't feel any different, but went there believing I'm going to get healed tonight, and came home and was like, you know what, I'm good. And didn't necessarily feel any different, didn't notice a difference, but went for a follow-up blood work. And they were like, your numbers are totally normal. They were like, how about you come back in a month and let's, just to make sure before we say healed, because you're inconsistent. So maybe you just had a spot, but unless she was pregnant, she was all over the map with these. I mean, and not a little bit, it was astronomical either direction. And then 2 months goes by, 3 months goes by, another round of blood work, 2 rounds of blood work. We're like, I think you might be healed. And I know that sounds like the pastors, we should have way more faith in that, but we were kind of, before I stood up and declared to the congregation, God did this, I wanted to make sure that it was done. Cause you have that, reputation. People have YouTube videos of guys that said somebody was healed and they weren't. And I don't want to be that way. So, we went with that. So, last, night we went to a special service with friends of ours, and my wife hasn't been able to smell since before Thanksgiving. And 2 of my buddies have been praying for people with residual COVID symptoms, and God's been healing them in service. So people that couldn't smell, they pray for them, and then they ask them to smell something, and they're able to smell. It's been wild. So they actually, Pastor Mark prayed for my wife Sunday morning. We weren't at the service, we were at our service, but then we went to the special service Monday night, and they prayed again for that stuff. Pastor Michael prayed, and, she raised her hands or whatever and prayed. And then, afterwards, here, smell this. Nothing instantaneously. But today she woke up and my son had taken a large poop. And that was the first thing she got to smell since Thanksgiving. So it was happy and funny at the same time. But you look at that, and I'm sure some skeptics out there was like, well, you know, it'd have been 3 months. They could have just gotten lucky with the day. You know, like they prayed for it last night and she happened to wake up tomorrow. It could be coincidence. And I'm sure it could be coincidence.
Well, this is interesting because it does the same thing. We speak of this area that are waiting for the other shoe to drop, the skeptics. Now, the skepticism is important because, like we said, if you're going to believe in a principle, it's got to hold up to under scrutiny. The scientific deal is that you could be right, that it could be your belief that healed. It could have been just in spite of your unbelief you got healed. It could have been just a natural tendency of your body healing yourself. All are possibilities. And I think, you know, like you were saying, that some people kind of take advantage of that because it's good marketing that the church healed people. It attracts people to be healed, right? Sure. And but my deal, I've seen a lot of stuff that doesn't make any scientific sense, and so I know that there are grains of that within there. And if you have a guy like you, if you say it, I am more apt to believe you because you want to be sure, just like everyone else. I
don't need God's shoulders are big enough that he doesn't need me to fake a miracle. And so, you know, when Sam was, you know, with her thyroid particularly, I think we went 2 or 3 rounds of blood work before I said anything from the pulpit. Like after we got the first one, she was in tears. She was excited. Like, I'm not going to have to go on medication. This is amazing. And this was 2018 or 3 years later, and she's had no issues, no complication. All the blood work continues to be normal. And up until that point, you know, we're talking, you know, 10 years of, unless she was pregnant, it was all over the map. And so when I look at that, I mean, you can say coincidence, her body healed herself, but up until that service where that moment happened, where her faith and the faith of the preacher collided, and then to have blood work 3 days later, that's completely normal. And then has trended that way, like that for me, I go, okay, you know, I mean, you can call that a coincidence. I don't see how you can, like, I don't see how, you know, we were told it was incurable. We were told she was going to be on medication for the rest of her life.
But I think that though, you're hitting that, you know, spiritual gifts come under certain circumstances and you're not going to control what they are, but you know, when they happen is when there's certain things in place. And you're watching in your church assembling some of these things that are very pro spiritual gift and, you know, enlightening and stuff like that.
Well, and it's fascinating because, you know, people attribute so much to Jesus, and they should, but when you look at Jesus's ministry, he was even limited by the people. So he goes to Nazareth, which is his hometown, and people say things like, "Oh, isn't that the carpenter's son?" Like, you know, they're immediately skeptical, degrading of who he is. There's no honor in it, and I think the passage even says, you know, a prophet is without honor in his own home, because, like, I raised that kid. I know who that kid is. I know what it's like to preach in my home church, the church I grew up in that watched me be a kid. You know, they saw me in youth group do stupid things and stuff like that. Like you just don't have the certain, you know, clout in that space. But when you look at, so Jesus goes to Nazareth, and the Bible says that he wasn't able to do a lot of miracles there because of their unbelief. And so there is an element of supernatural power in this, but there's also a huge element of our belief. And you and I talk about faith quite a bit. And if you want to build like a culture of faith and belief in your organization, in your life, you have to look at that, because you're going to get the skeptics, and Jesus had plenty of those. But he seemed to deliver when people's faith matched. There are times where he almost didn't want to be bothered with the miracle, and he turns and goes, "Well, your faith has made you well, go." And you know, doesn't make a big scene about it. You know, you have the woman with the issue of blood pushes her way through the crowd and thinks to herself, "If I could just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be healed." Jesus didn't pray for her. He was on his way somewhere else, and she attached her faith in that moment to that. And there are some in the Christian world that want to disregard faith altogether, but I'm like, Jesus talked about money and faith. So 2 things he talked about everywhere. Right. And if we're not okay to build a culture in our lives with money or faith, or in our business or wherever it is, you know, we're going to build one way or the other. That's the whole thing. It's like you're going to have a culture on money. You're going to have a culture on faith. You're going to have a culture on, and it will be either intentional or unintentional.
All right. So here, let me use a real world example here. We're talking about the culture of Youngstown, and you have a business like my business, and then you have a company right up the road. Do you ever hear Chilcan? You ever hear about this thing? Anyway, this guy came into town. He invented this aluminum can that chilled beverages. He built 2 huge buildings down there. He got a state or a city tax incentive to be able to have like a 5-year deferred state tax. He was going to build this big thing and bring all these jobs. Like day one, the community like turned their back on him. Like, this guy's going to come in here. He just did it for the state or the taxes. Yeah. And then like 4 years later, he still hasn't put anything in here. So then it took the cynics said that this is what was going to happen. And that's what happened. Did what they said had happened, and it's out there. And then you got a guy like me who'll come into town. And if the city said, here's some stuff, I'm going to say, if the city offers me something, then all of my community is going to turn against me, thinking that the only reason I'm here is for that. So I'll take those incentives and I won't do them, right? Because I don't want to give my cynics red meat. Right. So there's a belief that I have to win them over. And once I've won them over, then they don't have those criticisms to throw back at me. And here I sit having something with the same cynics that have nothing bad to say about me. The guy on the hill has an empty building and nothing going on.
So let's go there. So does the culture then of an area or a region dictate what you do? So that's what I'm hearing you say is, so, that guy couldn't come in from the outside and take all the incentives and do that stuff because it was never going to succeed here because there was a belief here that that's unclean or untouchable or not good. And so you're saying, well, then as a business owner, I can't take the incentives. I have to win those people over, and then once I've won the relationship over, then I can negotiate the incentives.
Yeah, because it was the same cynics. Yeah. Like they would have taken shots at me the same way. But instead, what I did was I decided that I'm going to help everybody first before I'm going to ask for anything. Giving information away before I ask for a dollar. Yep. And once that they've trusted me that my motivations are pure, where business, that people don't buy into business, they buy into people. Once 100%. They've adopted me as one of their own, then they're more likely to let me kind of move around and help people and then make a buck doing it and expand and grow without the cynics stop at that point.
Yeah. It's Gary V's principle, jab, 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 right hook, like give,
that's
give, and then you'll be able to ask. You'll have the currency.
But that's how you overcome a culture that is definitely not an ally. You don't go find an ally culture, right? Yeah. Because they don't exist. You turn into an ally culture.
Interesting. And to some extent, we've been talking a bunch about the church, but Bridge of Hope had built a culture in the community of serving long before I got here. I mean, they served the schools, for the last 25 years. They fed the football team and the cheerleaders and opened their buildings for all that stuff. And I came in and I had instant credibility that I didn't have to earn, because oh, you're the pastor of the church. I think the current football coach was a student and a player and ate at our football feeds and now comes back as the coach and so there's a reputation there that the church is willing to go the extra mile, and not just in the schools, but with lots of other things as well. And it opens more doors once you have that credibility. Nobody's sitting there second guessing the motivation of, well, should we, include the church or whatever. The 4th of July, we do face paint and fireworks. We're the only nonprofit that's involved with that. Everybody else is there selling their French fries and whatever else. And we just show up to pass out balloons and paint as many faces as possible before the sun goes down. And it's a lot of people, usually close to 1,000 people. Now, last year they didn't do it because of COVID. I don't know if they'll do it this year. But I love that event because it's completely hands off for us. We're not asking anybody for anything. We're just showing up. We buy all the balloons. We buy all the face paint stuff. And we're just there to make the event great for the town. And there was a story that I was told when I came in that they have done that event for a number of years. Like I said, we're the only nonprofit to my knowledge that's involved in it. And the one year, the town, for whatever reason, didn't invite the church to be a part of it that year. And they got so much not nice comments that there were no balloons and no face painting that the next year we were one of the first people to be invited. Now, that was before my time, and that was a story that was passed down to me. But when you build a thing like that in the culture and you've gained a reputation of, look, I'm not here to take from you, I'm here to give to you. I'm not here with an agenda. I'm here because I want this place to be the best place to call home.
Yeah, and
it changes things.
In 15 years, I haven't had to wonder what's in it for me. Literally, early version of me,
Yeah.
I was strategic. So I had to make sure if I was involved in something that was plenty on the other side to justify the time being into it. Now I'm like, give back, do my thing, and be involved, and I don't have to worry about that.
Well, but that speaks to a cultural point. When people are contractual, it's tough to have relationship because attorneys are contractual. I often tell people when they get married, this is not a contract, this is a covenant, and that's different. This is a relationship. And when you think that way contractually, I don't know if you ever had friends like that. They're like, well, I bought you lunch the last 3 times. And I'm always like,
what?
I don't like, I'll buy you lunch from now. You don't ever have to buy me lunch again. Like, and it makes it super awkward. I'm like,
right.
I didn't know we were in a contract. Like, I just thought we loved each other, and I'll buy you lunch, and I get it. Some people want to make sure things are, copacetic, and people are wired differently. I'm just always on the side of where I'm like, well, I'll just give. Like,
that's why we get along so well. We really do.
It is.
Have you ever been billed for a phone call from an attorney, by the way? I'm not ranking on, this is 2 shows in a row that I'm like, did the Bible say that attorneys are going to hell by any chance?
No. No.
Sorry, all the attorneys
I am, all the church attorneys we've had all worked with the churches pro bono and stuff like that, and have all been super gracious.
My attorney's great, by the way.
And and for me personally, as pastor, there are some things where people are just very gracious, and I don't ever want to take that for granted. But a lot of folks, and you've done it with Youngstown Computers, your money's no good here, and that's happened with attorneys for me personally. Like when we went to do our will or any of that sort of stuff, they're like, "Oh, pastor, we'll just take care of it," and that's super gracious and kind of people to do that. For that. So no, I've never received a bill from an attorney. That was a long answer to that. Have you received a bill from an attorney?
Oh yeah, I have. The bill for a phone call, like a 30-second phone call. I got a bill for it. And that caught me off guard a little bit because I thought maybe the call would circumvent the billing system, and it did not. Not at all.
My mom was a CFO for a law firm for 15 years. So she could tell you all about those billing cycles and how that works and stuff. They did like probate and wills and that sort of stuff. But yeah,
I was probably a little prick back then, and that they billed me because I wasn't a nice guy at that point.
But they were like, this guy charged him double.
Yep, that's it.
What's one piece of culture that you feel like you have not been able to change in one of your companies? Because I know coming into Bridge of Hope, there was a culture that was set. Some things I really liked and some things I didn't. And there were some things I'm like, I can kind of live with that for a little bit. Like, that's okay. But there's still a couple pieces. I'm like, man, I just have not been able to get us to turn the corner on that one. And I know you've been plugging away for 20 plus years in business. So I'm sure there's some things that you look at your business as like, oh my gosh, after 20 years, I have not been able to.
Deb tells me for the longest time that I have a firing problem. And that's not just like employees, but also customers. And there are some people that I've been dealing with because they pay their bill and whatever, but they're just atrocious in every way to deal with, and it's my responsibility to kind of cut those people out. And I hesitate. I'm gun shy about firing customers unless they give me, there's customers that I've had to personally service because I want to insulate my employees from having to deal with that, and that does not speak of my ability as a leader.
Yeah, firing's never fun. Have you ever had to fire an employee? I think we've had this conversation.
Not a good fire.
Not a good fire? No.
No, I'm like, shouldn't you want to quit by now? Come on.
I heard Gary Vee say one time that firing is the best way to build culture. He gets upset when he used the illustration that, if somebody's constantly showing up late and, they get written up or whatever, he goes, I want to fire them. And he goes, because it lets everybody else know that that's not acceptable. If they resign, he goes, that just ticks me off because I feel like they got away with it.
So yeah, that is still a piece of the armor that is absolutely missing in the liver area. So,
but it's very true because if you don't have teeth to stuff at home with your kids, like they do whatever they want, and the same way with employees. Like we very much call our leadership team. I don't call it a team. I was like, this is our leadership family. I want people to feel like they're part of a family. Everybody's got a role to play. Everybody's got a part to play. We're not always going to get along, but this is home. And when you build that culture, it's tough when you let somebody go.
Yeah, it is.
Tough when
you feel lost. It's like a breakup. It really is.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It's like a divorce.
Because you invest so much time in conversations and training and all that. It's more than just employee relationship with most of us.
So you've had a firing or two that you've done in your time?
No, I haven't. I've never fired a person. There's some people that I wanted to fire that happened to quit.
You just positioned them to quit.
Yes, yeah.
I've prayed a few people out.
Did you? And it worked?
In the best way possible. I've done that in a couple different
if you write the book, I how to pray people out, I will read it, and it'll be a new process.
I was just like, Lord, give them their dream job. And I just prayed for that.
Yeah.
And 6 months in, there they were, 8 months in, a year later, dream job. And it was perfect because it wasn't necessarily that, I would say it wasn't necessarily that, I had people that were bad at their jobs. They just weren't a good fit.
Yeah.
And to figure out, ways to navigate that became a win-win rather than a lose-lose.
Early on, I did a lot of hiring out of like sympathy, and people were in a bad spot, so I gave them a job and they weren't really a great worker. And so every day that they weren't a great worker, it like burned me up a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, please quit, please quit, please quit. And some of them lasted years. And I'm thinking like all the money that I spent watching someone like spin on their chair, collecting my paycheck, it built some animosity inside.
Yeah, I can imagine that's no good. And that's got to be so tough because you want to have a culture where people are showing up with their passions. One of the things I'm learning as a leader is that not everybody has the same goals as me. I go to bed thinking about the church. I wake up thinking about church. I think about the community, think about ways to get, I drive by empty buildings and I'm like, Lord, what could we do with that? Like, how could we help? Like, that's just where my brain is all the time. And that's not the case for everybody that calls, is on our staff, and certainly not all of our volunteers. Most of your volunteers are going to think about their job about 30 seconds before they show up and have to do it, and they're going to forget about it about 30 seconds after they walk out.
Yeah, in about 20 seconds in, they want to know when the first break is. Right? Where's the donuts?
Well, and that's there's a great book I read called Leading Without Power by Max Dupree, and it's all about leading in volunteer organizations and nonprofits, because one of the motivations you have is a paycheck. Like, you want to feed your family? I need you to show up and do this. Where in a volunteer organization, it's super high on the inspiration, and you have to tap into the purpose lever, because if there's no purpose involved, they may do a job because, the pastor asked, and I'll do that for 6 months, but then I have to be the source, and I'm like, come on. Yep. But when you get people aligned in their purpose and passions, I spend a lot of my time reshuffling the deck with volunteers and coaching people into places where they are just stinking happy to be, and then they'll come and they work for free. I mean, that's the whole thing, is like when you show up at church, 95% of everybody's working for free, with the exception of 1 or 2, 3 paid staff people. Everybody else is showing up because they believe in this beyond a paycheck, and they're in. But it's tough because all of them have different end goals. Some of them, their greatest passion is they want to be with their family. Some of them are building businesses. Some of them want to, be a millionaire by 45. Like, people have all sorts of different goals. And so when you're in a volunteer organization, you're trying to align where they want to go and where their passion is with something that works in your organization.
Now, you led this off by, the New England Patriots. They've got these things that they do. They form their culture by having those motivations and setting sort of like a vision. I can remember when I was in high school, I had a job at Sam's Club checking people out, right? Mm-hmm. And 1 6 o'clock shift, I come in, and instead of like everybody going to their registers, everybody's like in a circle in the front of the store. And you got this guy that is really hopped up on coffee like crazy, and he is really super pumped about his job. And he danced around with how happy he is that he's a Walmart employee, and we should all be just as happy as he was. And I never felt more disconnected from an individual than I did with him, because I'm not going to get real excited about it, because I'm not like really bought in. Like, the paycheck is while I'm here, and I'll give you what's going to keep me here, and that's the extent of it. Mm-hmm. So there is a whole formulated, I'm doing it. If you took the paycheck away, there's no way that I'm here. And then you have the other people that I think might be there even if you took the paycheck away.
Yeah. Well, and I've said that to our board. I've said that to people that I coach and lead. Like, I would show up without the paycheck. Like, this is what I'm built to do. And now I need to do something to feed my family, but my goal is, and I've said this to you a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, my goal is to one day not be in a place where I take a paycheck from the church. So that's actually what I do for service, and that I can make passive income doing, whether it's podcasting, books, etc., exterior speaking engagements to make money to provide for my family.
Do you see that on the horizon there? Do you see that?
Oh, I do.
It's getting bigger every day. It gets a little bit bigger in the horizon.
I almost sent you a note that I was laying. I slept horrible the last 2 nights, but anytime I do that, it's usually I have a dream or I'm working on something at 1 a.m. because for me, sometimes my most creative juices, like 11 to 1 a.m, I'll just fill up a whole note in my phone and I'm just flowing at that moment. And that was the other night, and I was thinking along those lines, and I'm like, I gotta start putting some dates to this, and I gotta start visualizing some of this stuff.
Well, let me share this with you. Yeah. So this public. So Debbie and I had this conversation the other day. So we have Gus the Bus, right?
Yeah.
And from day one, we have pictured ourselves being on Gus the Bus, traveling from place to place, doing public speaking. And it's gotten to the point where I see it so in the short future here. I bought a Jeep to tow behind the Gus so that when we're in doing public events, we'll have a so this isn't like what's going to happen out way in the future. I'm doing preparation so that this is all ready for us the moment that phone rings for the first time. And in order for that to happen, the phone has to be ready and in my hand waiting for that call to come in. I'm doing all of that groundwork so that happens.
So I haven't said this publicly, so we'll just do it on the podcast. So the vision that I've been casting with the team for the church is we're going to be opening a college campus on our church campus. So the college I went to, University of Valley Forge, has these advanced sites where you can earn your degree all the way through a master's degree at the local site, and then we would do all the spiritual formation, chapel, etc. And now, obviously, predominantly their stuff is ministry based, but they have degrees in other things as well. That's part one. Part two is we want to reproduce, and so I want to put a campus in Trumbull County and Columbiana County, and I want to kind of have 3 hubs. And I know once I get to that point, there's going to be a person that runs that hub, and this hub, and I'm going to be in a position where I'm going to oversee the hubs and not be in the day-to-day as much as I am now. Beautiful. And that, for me, is the spot where I want to be in a position where I go, I don't need money. I'm just here because I love this place, and this is where God's put me, and I can help these people succeed and do their thing. And in order to do that, I know I'm going to travel a bit. Actually, Andre in November said, prepare to go on the road, was a prophetic word he gave me. And you know, God's going to open some doors for us to be able to do that. My wife and I are like, what is that going to look like? We have 4 kids and they're really little. And there's, a bunch of those type questions, but I know that that's been in your heart, and we've gone back and forth on some of that. And so I certainly can see it, and I see where the next 24 to 48 months for the church, and where that's going to be positioned for that stuff to be a reality, where I won't have to take a salary from the church. Like, I will get to be a volunteer like everybody else. And I love that, because I think it'll give me currency that I don't have right now. Because everybody's like, well, pastor has to make that decision because, he has to get up and ask for money because, we pay his paycheck. And the day that I don't have to take a paycheck, I can be like, you know what? I don't.
That's you not taking the tax break for the city of Yes.
Exactly.
Yep.
And then I think we will be able to grow exponentially and do stuff that we never dreamed possible with that type of credibility, to be able to say, I don't take a paycheck from the church. I'm here serving blood, sweat, and tears because I believe in this and I love it. And that, to me, is the culture that I want.
All right, so let's do timeline, because our listeners get to see us not just talk about this stuff, but we actually create this stuff in our own lives. There is nothing, we are just 2 dudes, right? There's nothing special or no advantage, or there wasn't anything that was bestowed upon us that not everybody in our audience of listening cannot replicate. So here's what it is. About a year ago, 2 dudes sat down and we said, Panera Bread, and said, what's our goals? What are we doing? What are we? And we shared some back and forth about what we can do. And we both nodded and said, yep, that's what we're going to do. Now, it took us saying, hey, we're going to show up at this place, get in front of a microphone, talk to each other, really rehearse the chemistry between us, make sure that what we're saying is even listenable to anyone.
Do you have those videos for the first couple we did?
I do. Just sitting on that computer over there.
At some point, we will have to buzz those out.
Right.
Because they're probably not as pretty as this.
No, they don't sound as good.
There's no lighting.
It's on a stool.
We had those lights on the floor that were god-awful bright.
So if you're listening at home, about a year of doing absolutely nothing, having no positive affirmations. There wasn't anybody saying this is going to be okay. There wasn't anything that was on the horizon. There wasn't anything that was tangible. If somebody came along and said, hey, you know what, you're wasting your time, you'd probably like, yeah, I probably am. And it wouldn't take a whole lot to put you over. So if any of you out there right now are dissuaded by what is in store with you, the investment that you make is not usually, the good ones don't happen in 30 days and don't happen in 6 months.
No. Yeah. Those 20-year overnight successes. That's what it is. And no, and I've actually started, and I haven't told you this yet either, but in my late nights where I'm feeling creative, I've started putting together a book called The Mechanics of Faith, and it's all the stuff that we've been talking about and learning through, and it's a blend of obviously some of the spirituality side of things where that's my arena, but then the very tangible stuff that we've seen, that we've done, and that we're doing, and I think it's going to be a fun book for people that look at life and go, I want to create that, I want to do that. Well, great, this is actually the mechanics of it. This is how.
And some of the people who already have spiritual disciplines, that a lot of what you say makes sense, but there's also people who don't have that developed and like, I just want to do something, but I don't know what the heck to do.
Yeah, and I want to put that book almost right down the middle. You don't know that you're going to write it with me yet. I hadn't told you that. But
I find out things on the show.
It says it right at the top of the node. But no, truly, because there's whole sections in there that I will write with a certain tenor and voice that you will write totally differently, and you'll speak to a different group of people that
but there's a certain harmony between the both sides. It's such a strange phenomenon.
Yeah. So I'm looking forward to all that. I can see that it's tangible. Just like I mentioned the $50,000. Like, I have no doubt in my mind that sometime in the next 30 to 45 days, someone is going to walk into the church. Maybe somebody that doesn't even come to church. They heard it because they listened to the show, or they, a friend of theirs mentioned it or whatever, is going to walk in and be like, here you go, it's $50,000.
Am I allowed to in the future say, hey, do you remember that one time at the whiteboard I said you're going to spend $40,000 in marketing, research, and development, and you thought it was out of my freaking skull?
I did. You were like 40 grand. I was like, where the heck am I going to get $40,000 from, man? I know.
Well, one day you're going to be like, I spend that on pencils.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. No, and that's the whole thing is, I don't want to believe the hype. I don't want to listen to all the noise out there. Like, I want to keep my feet on the ground. I want to keep learning and all of that. But I want to build a culture where anything's possible. And, I would say if I had to theme our relationship, I think that's the greatest deposit that Joe Danier's made into my life, is like, you talk about faith, but really you only believe it like this much. And the stretch to, well, that's not impossible. It's only impossible because I say it's impossible. And if I can position myself.
Stuff is already infinite. Like, why you think there's a difference between limitation and, everything's infinite, but my part is limited,
Right? Yeah.
And if you're a conduit and everything's infinite, you basically build the pipe that fits whatever you feel like fitting it through.
But I had to fight through a culture and change my own personal culture to get there. Look at how. All right, so let me
reverse this. You asked me the question. You are more apt to answer this.
Yeah.
So you hit a culture that was personal and environmental, where you had to fight against some pressures that suggested that you might be wrong a little bit, right?
Yeah. So for me, I think the three things that we've done at the church well to shift culture, and that I've done personally, one is consistency. Kids learn through consistency. Like, if I'm inconsistent with my kids, they know they can get away with stuff. But if I'm consistent, they know what to expect. And with the staff, with the team, I did now. Personally, I was not all there on the financial end of things. When we started, before I ever met Joe, and before I took some of these leaps for myself, I can remember early on. Some Mondays we would get the offering count, and I'd be in my office like pretty close to the verge of tears. So I'm like, Lord, I'm not gonna be able to pay anybody this week. Like, what are we gonna do? But then when I went up to have my conversation, I'd have that moment in my office very privately. But when I went up there, I was like, I'm gonna exude positivity. We are not gonna, like, even though the internal struggle was real, I wanted everybody that we talked about finances, we're going to talk about it up here. And I don't care that on the inside I'm dying, and I don't know where that's going to come from, and I don't know how we're going to do that. But and I set such a precedent to consistently and positively, and I wasn't going to let it affect me publicly. Now, privately, I had to work through, and I had to catch my heart up to where, or my head up to where my heart was. And that took time, but that consistency was really important. Two, I think deciding what hills are worth dying on, because there's some things in culture that you're like, well, that's just Youngstown culture. It's not a hill. It doesn't matter one way or the other. I may not particularly like that hill, but I don't need to die on that hill. I'm going to die on this hill over here because that one makes or breaks, the future.
Well, let me vouch for you. I mean, I saw the early one when you would talk about money. You really struggled, and it spoke of your character because you had sensitivities on behalf of other people.
Yeah.
I watched you be a protector of the feelings of the people who you knew when you hear words about money, clam up and they get defensive about it. And then I watched you stretch yourself, which then you got to make other people more confident because now they trusted you and they saw that it was better. They saw that it was safer, and you made and changed that in their hearts.
Yeah. Thank you. But that consistency, the other one, and then I was going to say, and under promise and over deliver. The times where I've made mistakes is where I over promise, or I haven't brought clarity to the promises I've made. And so it leaves people with unmet expectations and frustrations. And so when you can under promise and over deliver, people go, oh, he gets stuff done. He delivers.
You don't have to worry about it anymore. Yep.
So for me, those were the three things I think shifted the culture in the church, which is that, that consistency, deciding which hills are worth dying on. And then, when I wanted to change something, I'm going to under promise, and I know that we're going to deliver on that. So
every show I say, this is the best show we've ever done.
This was a ton of fun.
Yeah, it was good.
We started out, in a broad sense, talking about culture, and ultimately finished talking about culture. But I think the journey we took to get there,
what we do,
had tons of nuggets for people. So I hope you enjoyed the show. We ran a bunch over. I think this was one of our best ones. I like this one.
There you go.
So, all
right, cool.
See you guys.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. If you like our programming, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page, or subscribe to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. This is original Youngstown content, and we would appreciate you sharing the videos and the word about us.